Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for coming to this really rather early first seminar for humans, AI, and decision making. And thank you especially, of course, to my presenters here, who are our presenters who are going to give us some really interesting information during this panel. Three of whom you can see before you, one of whom will be dialing in over GoToMeeting with any luck a little bit later in the proceedings. Now, by way of an introduction, I thought that the best thing for me to do was to kind of give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about during the seminar. So after my poorly structured and rambling initial remarks, Isabel Thompson from Holtzbrinck Publishing Group will give us a presentation around defining an artificial intelligence strategy. Isabel has some absolute fantastic experience working at Holtzbrinck, and then before that at Cambridge University Press, and she is going to be, and so just again kind of give you a little bit of a spoiler about what she's going to talk about. When she talks about an artificial intelligence strategy, or when she asks that question, she's going to explain how that really is the wrong question to ask. So that's a good starting point for a seminar on artificial intelligence. After that, John Sack, here from Highwire Press, who's founding director at Highwire Press, he's going to give us something that's a little bit more practical, in a sense, because he's going to be talking about the editorial questions that artificial intelligence can answer. After John's talk, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion where everybody can kind of ask questions and talk a little bit about what we've heard so far, and then there'll be a networking break before John Stroll of Clarivate Analytics is going to give a talk about essentially the technology that sort of underlies artificial intelligence. So that'll give us some more kind of context and some more kind of basic understanding of what we're talking about. And then dialing in over GoToMeeting will be Pauline Crapel of My Science Work. And the stuff that she's going to be talking about is a little bit more on the bleeding edge, perhaps, and it's a little bit more around perhaps reputational management and how artificial intelligence works for researchers. So that'll be an interesting kind of rounded off for the whole seminar. And after that, we'll have another short discussion. So I neglected to mention that I'm Phil Jones, and I'm from Emerald Publishing. If that affiliation is somewhat confusing, I used to work at Digital Science until really quite recently. So that gives me an interesting perspective in a sense, because I'm somewhat of a poacher turned gamekeeper in that I used to be interested in developing these kinds of technologies as products, and now I'm on the other end as a publisher thinking about whether they are relevant and interesting for the sorts of things that we're trying to achieve ourselves. So my very simple introduction into how we got here. In a sense, this is the rationale that kind of kicks off where this seminar sort of comes from. So in terms of information and decision making, I suppose the grandfather of all of this is Eugene Garfield, who founded ISI back in 1955. And as everybody knows, so I won't go into too much detail about what Web of Science is and about what those kinds of analytics, those kind of scientometric analytics are, I'd suffice to say that what Eugene Garfield really wanted to do was to measure the propagation, if you like, of human knowledge. So the idea is that an individual, a researcher, writes an article, that article might get cited by 2 or 3 more articles, which get cited again and so forth, and he wanted to create a network of that propagation of knowledge. And that's a very interesting and fascinating way of looking at how we learn as people, as humans, and how we move forward in terms of understanding the world around us. What it was used for, a fair amount, particularly the impact factor, is comparing the reputations and the prestige and the quality of journals themselves. So that's a good use of using this sort of data in order to make decisions. And librarians today still use the impact factor when they're judging which journals to subscribe to and which to not subscribe to. Where it was misused, and where it continues to be arguably misused, is in the measurement of the quality of the components that go into the journal. If you like, measuring the quality of researchers or measuring the quality of the content within the journal itself. And anybody who kind of follows kind of scientometrics and the responsible use of analytics will be aware of cases, particularly internationally, where academics are incentivized to publish in high-impact journals, where they are judged based on the impact factor of the journals that they publish in rather than the quality of the research itself. So that's an early example of how when we have a particular metric, it's possible to misuse it. And I think that's a very important point that we will probably expand on a little bit later. So the thing about the impact factor is, well, the impact factor really, and ISI in general, is that it was a valuable resource and continues to be a valuable resource, but something changed when the internet came along. Now this graph here is from the Leiden Manifesto, and what it shows is the number of mentions of impact factor in the academic literature, and along came the internet and you see it kind of rocketed. So in a sense that was showing you that there was an appetite, as informatics came along, to use metrics and to use analytics in order to assess things and to make decisions. The problem seemed to be that we only had this one metric that anybody was using, and we were applying it to too many things. So when all you have is a hammer, everything kind of looks like a nail. The response to that from the kind of community and the industry was to broaden the sorts of things that we are measuring. And many of you will be familiar with the Altmetric Manifesto. Jason Preem was the lead author in that, and if you were involved in those kinds of conversations a few years ago, he would have been in very many panels talking about his view of how we expand, how we judge the scholarly literature and scholarly content and make decisions around that. And there were a couple of commercial vendors that appeared. Altmetric is one very notable example. Plum Analytics is another, who are gathering things like mainstream media mentions, policy documents, news articles, so on and so forth, to get a bigger understanding of the impact of that literature. But at the end of the day, that's still just counting stuff. And so it's not really getting to the underlying quality, if you like, or qualities of the research being done in a way that's going to enable people to make intelligent decisions, or that's going to give us all of the information necessary to make the best decisions. So we start to see, in a sense, signals of disquiet around this issue. That it's not just good enough to count, we have to start building stories, if you like, around content, around articles, around research and around researchers. So from the community we see things like the Metric Tide and the Leiden Manifesto, which I previously mentioned, and then DORA in San Francisco, the Declaration on Research Assessment. And so there's this sense that we can't just use metrics as a blanket way of assessing things, you have to use them in a responsible way. And you see funders, particularly in the UK, around the Research Excellence Framework, asking institutions to write narratives around the sorts of impact that their research is having so that they can make better decisions about how to spend their money. We see that in the Netherlands with the Dutch Standard Evaluation Protocol, and in Australia as well with the ERA. And I think there are several other kind of examples internationally of how funders are looking to really assess a broader sense of what impact is beyond simply counting, whether that be citations or alternative metrics. So that brings us to turning impact into narrative. And one of the things that occurred to me when I was putting this presentation together is that there are three really quite well developed products from three very interesting information services company out there. From digital science, there's Symplectic Elements, which is sold to institutions to enable them to get a sense of all of the research that they are producing, all of the inputs in terms of grants, all of the outputs in terms of publications and so forth. Converis from Clarivate Analytics performs a very similar function, and Pure from Elsevier. So those are three examples of what we call a current research information system, which is allowing institutions to tell stories about the research that their academics are doing, which then funders use as a way to make decisions about where they're directing their funding. In addition to that, we see companies springing up who are tackling that from a researcher point of view and helping researchers tell stories about the impact of the work that they're doing, in hopes that will allow them to get better funding, allow them to get promoted, and allow them to build kudos, if you like, within the academic community and amongst institutions and ultimately funders. So we get to the point where we realize that it's necessary to look beyond numbers. And so if we're looking beyond numbers and telling stories about impact, can we turn this on its head and start teaching the computers to read, teaching the computers to understand those narratives, or to make those narratives for us so that we can scale this kind of analysis? And this brings us to some of the research that we're going to be talking about during the course of the seminar. And I think it's worth kind of giving you one kind of taster of one technique that's used around semantic analysis, or artificial intelligence, if you like, that helps us kind of start to move towards that situation where computers are making a more almost qualitative, or maybe they're quantizing something that we would previously look at as qualitative, kind of understanding assertions and concepts and so forth. So this is a very simple example, and it shows a very simple kind of concept extraction or topic model analysis. And what we do is we take a series of articles and we look at the frequency of the words that's used in those articles, and then we perhaps compare that to the frequency of words used in similar articles about a different subject, and what drops out are the important technical words. And then you start to see how you can extract concepts from a corpus of literature. And so once you can start to extract concepts from a corpus of literature, you can start to classify things in interesting ways, and then you can start measuring a number of different sorts of ideas and concepts, and build a much broader picture of what's going on. We'll probably talk a little bit later on about some of the newer research that's going on to take things beyond this kind of topic modeling level into things like semantic triples and assertion mapping, where we're trying to understand the relationships between objects mentioned in literature so that we can figure out not just what the ideas are that are being talked about, but hopefully eventually how those ideas relate to each other and the statements that are being made. So these sorts of tools are already appearing, and they've already been around for a little while. If you look at Elsevier's SciVal, that's capable of pulling concepts out of literature, and you can do analyses around emergent topics and ideas and word models that are within the content that SciVal can explore. And Digital Science, working with their consultancy and Dimensions, also do a lot of very, very good work around topic modeling and around concept extraction, which is then used to fuel their consultancies for publishing and for publishers and for funders and for institutions, helping them understand where growth areas are within particular disciplines, who emergent researchers are, those sorts of questions. So as well as those more mature companies, we also have some innovators entering the market, some insurgent players, if you like, and just two examples, because there are many. Unsilo, they're partnering with Springer Nature and Karga to create a product that, well, they do a number of things, but one of the products is kind of interfaces with that research, with that publisher's content, and allows you to pull out concepts, spin up microsites around particular issues and concepts and ideas. And then Meta. And during John's talk, he'll be talking a little bit about what Highwire are doing with Meta. And so those of you who've been interested in what's going to come out of that, and have been interested in what the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation are trying to do there, would be very interested to hear from John about that. So that is basically my whistle-stop tour of the rationale that leads us to this discussion. And so with that, being very conscious of time, I will hand you over to Isabel, who's going to talk about what it means to build an artificial intelligence strategy. Here we go. We do have a clicker. There we go. That's the second slide. Oh, my word.
Everybody shut your eyes.
Close your eyes. Close your eyes. That was a spoiler.
You have to believe in the magic.
There we go. I should have tested the clicker, actually, by doing that. The clicker does not seem to work.
Oh, that's devastating.
That's the one thing that we did not... Oh, maybe it does. There you go. It does work.
Sweet. So which is the...
So it's just the left and right arrows there.
I'm not a tech expert. Oh, no, let me turn on my microphone. Otherwise, I'm not going to hear any of my amazing words.
We can't keep it off that second slide.
There we go. Can everyone hear me now? Cool. I'm not a tech expert. I'm a strategist. And what I think is that scholarly communication doesn't have an AI or a tech problem. It has a strategy problem. So scholarly artificial intelligence has tremendous capabilities, but it is dramatically underutilized by scholarly is dramatically underutilized by organizations within scholarly communication, and it's basically a disaster because businesses all over the world are struggling with what to do about artificial intelligence. And they all cite the same kind of problems. They say they have competing investment priorities, that they have unclear use cases, that they have no idea what the ROI is. And we all have problems with not enough data, that the data we do have is poor quality or siloed. We are distinctly unagile organizational setups, and of course, a complete lack of, well, not complete lack, but a significant lack of data scientists and tech talent. And so if you look at this, I mean, it's pretty much a nightmare, isn't it? But if you look at it, these are all strategic problems, not technical ones. And it's only by addressing these that any organization can begin to unlock some of AI's potential. So, what is this potential, and how do we unlock it? Well, luckily, that's what I'm going to talk about. First up, what is AI? Secondly, what can it do? And thirdly, what the hell should I therefore do about it? Oh. Oh. Apparently I can't gesture as much. Should I take this off?
Yeah, or just turn it off.
Just turn it off.
Do you have a lavalier on?
Sorry?
If you have a lavalier on, then leave it on. I'll adjust it. I didn't know you had a lava. Sorry about that. There you go.
Oh, I'll put it back on again.
You can wear it. I didn't see it on you.
Oh, that's all
Sorry.
right. Is it being recorded?
Yeah.
Thank God, posterity isn't going to want to miss this. Okay, yeah, so what is AI? Now, there are endless definitions. For fun, I've decided to pick Amazon's to make a bit of a change, because as it turns out, Amazon have also made a foray into the dictionary market. And they say that AI is the field of computer science dedicated to solving cognitive problems commonly associated with human intelligence, such as learning, problem solving, and pattern recognition. So not a bad definition, actually. But while these endless definitions can be instructive, I don't think they necessarily help us understand what AI is or how we might use it. And so, since AI is an incredibly broad field with almost infinite complexities, I've decided today not to go into technical detail, but instead to talk quite broadly about concepts and practicalities. So to start off, I thought I would share a few interesting conceptual ways to think about artificial intelligence that might help us understand it. And these come from Dr. Philip Gerbert, who's an AI expert at Boston Consulting Group, or BCG. And Dr. Gerbert starts off by saying that artificial intelligence is an intuition machine. And here it rather contrasts with traditional computers that we might think of as being logic machines. Artificial intelligence, learns from experience, but doesn't necessarily know why it does what it does, which is an interesting way to think about what intuition is. And to illustrate, we can think a bit about how AI learns. In the very simplest terms, and AI algorithms don't have any particular innate ability, but as data is added and they learn more about their context, they improve their ability to move towards a goal. And so imagine that you were in a forest in the pitch black and in the middle of the night and you wanted to get out. You wouldn't just start running because you'd probably bump into a tree or trip over a root. What you do instead is probably feel your way with very, very small steps. And after a while, you get a feel for how far apart the trees were, whether or not there were ferns on the ground or if it was bare. And you might start to be able to move through the woods more quickly and with increasing levels of confidence. But that doesn't mean, even if you started to kind of get the hang of it, that you couldn't at any moment trip over a tree root or get some new data. And then you'd have to pick yourself up and readjust what you thought about your surroundings and carry on from there. And this is, in essence, kind of what AI does, again, speaking very broadly. It makes a move, calculates the result, the distance between the result and the goal, and then adjusts the parameters in the direction of the goal. So that's the first thing to think about. AI learns from experience using data, but doesn't necessarily know why it does what it does. The next thing to think about is that while AI may achieve the same goals as humans, it doesn't necessarily do it in the same way that a human would. And again, Dr. Gerbert has I really like this example. He says that submarines don't swim. yes, they move through the water, but they don't do what fish or humans do to achieve that. They don't actually swim. And he says that we shouldn't expect driverless cars to mimic human-driven cars, just like we shouldn't expect, or would never expect, human-driven cars to mimic horse-drawn carriages. And for me, there's an obvious parallel here from the move from print to digital, where basically what we did was digitize print workflows. And in the future, this is not what we want to do. I mean, it's a terrible approach anyway, but we particularly don't want to do it with AI, because with AI, it works much better to think about goals and not about processes. So there we go. AI is an intuition machine, it learns from experience, and it doesn't swim. Definitely don't drop it in the water. With these kind of qualities, what is it that it can actually do? Well, PwC have a rather nice quadrant, which I'm going to talk you through, which has two axes based on how hardwired or adaptive a system is, and how involved a human has to be on the other. And I'm going to start very broad here and then move into more specific examples. So this is the broad overview. First up, and again, this is how you can think about what roles AI could potentially play in your organization. First up, you've got automation, which are manual, repetitive tasks where AI can help where humans might be slow or less efficient. Then you've got assisted intelligence, which is where artificial intelligence systems can help humans perform tasks quicker or better. Then you've got augmented intelligence, which is helping humans not to do things quicker and better, but to actually make better decisions. And these learn from their interactions with humans and with the environment. And then lastly, you've got automation intelligence, which is AI systems that can adapt to their surroundings and act autonomously. So these are 4 broad categories. To go deeper, PwC have this very nice visual, which looks at AI's capabilities and that sort of techniques and sorts them into layers. So you can see here you've got the foundational layer, which is some of the research fields that support AI, like computer science or statistics, obviously being a massive one. Building on that, you've got the cognitive layer, how AI systems actually structure their information and sort of come to decisions, and you've got some of the processes there, like machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, etc. Then on top of that, you've got the behavioral layer, where some of these cognitive systems actually interact start actually performing maybe useful tasks like machine translation or robotics process automation. And then on top of that, you've got the sensory layer, which are systems that enable AI to interact with people and with the environment, like natural language processing, machine vision, navigation, that type of thing. But given AI's, again, infinite complexities, I'm going to focus on one area, which is deep learning, and look at some practical examples. And I'm going to look at non-industry examples and then scholarly comms examples. Deep learning, again, a multitude of techniques, but you can pretty much categorize these into 8 main categories. And here are the first 4. So classification is where, based on a set of training data, a system will categorize a new input as belonging to a set of predefined categories. So you can think of YouTube being shown loads and loads of cat videos, being told that these are cat videos, and then being able to see a new video and knowing that it's also of a cat falling off a table or whatever the cat is doing. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc. also use this to identify inappropriate content and things like that. In scholarly comms, you could think of it as it's already being used for things like document classification or assigning content to a taxonomy. Second example is, or second use case, is anomaly detection, which is a bit like a subcategory of classification, where, again, a set of training data, new inputs can be seen as being unusual to what it's been told to look for, and you get this a lot in engineering. Like you might monitor an engine and see whether certain vibrations are normal, and if they go outside the normal bounds, then you've got a problem. And it's also used in banks for fraud detection. There are 2 companies doing that. And in scholarly communication, you could potentially, I guess, use this in peer review to look at whether a particular statistical test is actually an inappropriate one to use in a situation, or maybe a listed co-author is actually very unlikely for various reasons, things like that. And you've got clustering, which is to do with looking at the data set and drawing up into particular categories, drawing categories out of the data. And an example of this might be customer segmentation. And Netflix have been incredibly successful here by no longer grouping customers based on traditional categories like age, gender, or geography, and looking instead for taste, which just arises out of the data and can't be sort of predefined. And obviously we can use this in scholarly communication to move beyond looking in discoverability to looking beyond research disciplines. We've got continuous estimation, which can be used to predict sales demand based on weather, new trends, maybe social listening even, and make predictions. And then you've also can use this in scholarly communication for maybe predicting how many citations a paper will get. Bear with me, we've got 4 more, sorry. These are quite quick because recommendations, fairly obvious. We're all quite familiar with Amazon, Netflix, and Spotify, and maybe picking the next book to read or journal. Ranking is the last set, sorts information into the right order, ranks it basically, and it's usually the last step in a search engine, which pairs up with recommendations. Is you have you can like pair those two up quite a lot. So you've got the recommendations, and then they're ranked in order to present to the user. Then you've got all other optimization, because optimization can be the goal of a lot of these things, but it also has specific other examples. So like Deliveroo and Uber would use this to find the best drivers for a particular route. Cargo companies, shipping companies use it to optimize fuel or time savings. I think we can be a lot more creative in scholarly communication to use it for improving website design or researcher engagement with content. Data generation, you give a system loads and loads of data, and then it will create something new that's appropriate. So you can give it loads of music, and it might create a synthetic song. You can give it loads of journal articles, it might write a new journal. And so with all of this, I think you can see there are quite a few exciting use cases for scholarly communication. And these basically they span operational efficiencies, website design, sales, marketing, discoverability, endless others. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I do apologize for that. But knowing what AI can do, some examples, I think, makes it easier to think about where it might apply to different parts of your business, which in turn will then make it easier to prioritize. Assuming that you still with me, then and you're feeling convinced that you want to get a little bit involved, then what do you do? Number 3, what should I do? And this is really what I want to talk about. What should I do? First up, on no account, invest in AI. Don't do that. Invest in a business problem. AI is a tool like anything else, and it should be evaluated to see if it's actually the right thing for the job, because there's an awful lot of hype around it, and it also has a lot of specific requirements and ongoing maintenance needs. So you need to rationally evaluate whether the cost versus benefit ratio actually makes it worth it, and it is completely fine to say that it isn't. But if you do look at where companies globally are getting value from AI, then what's interesting is that they tend to be using it in the core parts of their value chain. And this is different from other emerging technologies, which you tend to find on the peripheries. We're seeing it really, really in the core of businesses, making very tangible differences. And McKinsey have 4 areas where AI is having particular impact in the so-called value chain, which you can see here. So first up, you've got prediction about future trends which can inform product development, sales, R&D, all that sort of stuff. Then you've got producing more products more efficiently, more quickly, more cheaply, whatever. Promoting the right products to the right people at the right time. And then providing an enriched or personalized user experience. And that can both be on a website or making sure that someone gets their coffee just how they like it. And if we look at this and apply it to traditional publishers, and I think you can kind of hone in on particularly produce and promote as being 2 key areas. Produce, you can think about editorial and production, and promote sales, marketing, and discoverability. And I think this also quite nicely equates to the simple dichotomy between top line and revenue generating impact and bottom line efficiencies. We really are very, most businesses would be able to see considerable improvements with discoverability, sales, and marketing with better predictions of demand and article recommendations and such like, and advertising. And on the bottom line, it can help with production costs, supply chain management, and the stocking of books in your warehouse or whatever. Of course, talking a little bit about traditional publishers there, but the way that publishers are creating value is changing. And things like discoverability, analytics, text and data mining, author services are all now key parts of a publisher's offering when they weren't even 10 years ago. And I think artificial intelligence is only going to exacerbate these types of shifts because it impacts the way that industries as a whole and professions create value. Think of the changing role of the radiographer now that computers can better read X-rays and spot cancer and such like, and how the role of the taxi driver might completely disappear with driverless cars. I think we need to think very carefully how using AI, or just being affected by AI at a society level, will impact how we create value for research in the longer term. So in addition to value creation, I want to look briefly at two other important areas that I think are particularly important for scholarly communication and that will impact or should impact strategy. And these are competitive advantage and partnerships. First up, competitive advantage. Improved production efficiency or discoverability can be key ways to gain a competitive edge. But as soon as everyone starts automating the same parts of a journal workflow, what starts off as an advantage just becomes the normal cost of creating a journal. And so developing and sustaining competitive advantage is going to change. And I think that we're going to see that data is going to be a key way to be able to create competitive advantage. And in particular, having access to unique data sets that your competitors do not have access to, because unique data enables you to create unique insights, products, and services on top of it. And then the second area is partnerships, because as I said, data is going to be already critical, but increasingly critical. And it's siloed across and within publishers, research institutions, vendors, everywhere. And no one organization is going to have all the information that it would like to. And this means that we're going to need to be more creative and open with our partnerships. We've seen relationships shift in other industries. For example, Walmart now shares huge amounts of data with fast-moving consumer goods companies in shared data lakes, and this ends up creating a lot of value and improvements both for the supplier and on the supply and the sell side. And scholarly communication, while very collaborative, I think could be considerably more proactive and open in its relationships. And another reason that this is going to be particularly important is that most AI talent sits with the vendors. We obviously can't imagine or can't kid ourselves that small university presses or even large but digitally slow-moving legacy publishers are going to be able to build state-of-the-art AI technical teams. There are not enough AI experts in the world to go around for Google, let alone for us. And most businesses aren't actually set up to make use of them, even if they wanted to. And the good news, though, is that you don't need to, because AI is increasingly becoming commoditized. You can use AWS for image recognition. You can train up a software developer to use Google TensorFlow. And you can get data consultants and vendors in to look at your data and help you work out what might be possible with it. And John is going to be talking a little bit more about this type of thing in a moment. And the third area that I think is particularly key for how AI will affect partnerships is in terms of partner relationships and the structure of the relationship. Since you can't just buy AI and plug it in, the data and the training are crucial, you often end up developing a joint product with a vendor, which means that ownership and development become increasingly important and can become issues. And so structuring the relationship and contracts carefully is crucial. So these themes, value creation, competitive advantage, and partnerships, all add up to one big question that you may well have, which is, do I buy or build? And again, I really like this. BCG have quite a nice way of looking at this, and they say to put the access on one side, how essential is the data that you have for your competitive differentiation? And on the other one, how unique your data set is versus any vendor. And if you look at that, this actually becomes relatively easy to think about where you might buy and build in a broad sense. If you've got an incredibly unique data set that's critical for your competitive advantage, then potentially you might want to consider building. But certainly if you're looking to create efficiencies in production or something like that, then that's not something you want to be developing yourself. And if you ever end up finding that you're developing some new machine learning technique, then you're probably doing it wrong. And if you're, after all this, absolutely gagging to give it a go, then McKinsey have pulled out 5 areas that they consider to be absolutely crucial to a successful AI transformation. And these are having the right business case, as we've talked about, building a data ecosystem, getting the right tools and techniques, integrating throughout your current workflows, and adopting an open culture and reskilling the workforce. So this is all very well. And even running through these quite quickly, they probably make sense, not rocket science. But I thought, especially given everything that I've been talking about so far, it might be fun to look at this in a completely different, slightly off-the-wall way. So bear with me. I thought, what if we think about AI not as being an abstract algorithm, but instead, or abstract algorithms, instead we thought of it as an Alien Pentakus. Well, that's like an alien octopus with 5 legs, one for each of McKinsey's five things. And the reason this idea came to me one night, obviously, was that artificial intelligence, in a way, is a little bit like an alien because the value doesn't reside in the algorithm. It comes to Earth, or it comes into your business completely naive with no inbuilt capabilities, really. The data and the training, the supervision are key. And you have to, in order to be able to make use of it, you have to make operational changes and organizational changes and focus on the data and all that sort of thing. So it's basically like a little bit like an alien.
3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That's pretty much all I've got. And so we can now, with our little alien, apply McKinsey's 5 things to it. First up, get the right business case. No case, no point. Don't bother. Focus on the goal and then select the means. And just because your competitors have an AI-alien and you think it looks cool is not a reason to get one. It takes a lot of looking after. Remember, an AI-alien is for life and not just for Christmas, or even this financial year. Second is building a data ecosystem. In order to learn, the AI-alien needs data, loads and loads of delicious data. But she's very, very fussy, and she only likes data in a particular structure, particular quality. She wants absolutely loads of it, often needs to be told what she's eating. And if you don't do this, or if you don't focus on bias, then anything that she says will be nonsense. And you're not going to be able to, so if you can't get your data house in order, then you're not going to be able to feed her. Third up is tools and techniques, because let's face it, unlike looking after your standard analytics animal or database dog, an Alien Pentakus needs special handlers with different skills and completely different ways of working. And so you need to think really hard about what talent you need in your organization and whether you need outside help. And this, again, is where partnerships become relevant, because maybe you want to take a borrow my doggy approach, where the vendor keeps the AI, but you get to have some of the benefits. Fourth is workflow. You've got to integrate through your entire workflow, because there's no point going to nurture your little AI-alien into growth if you keep it outside in a kennel. Don't do that. It's got to be like right in the middle of the organization where it can learn about everything and impact everything and have the best access to all the data. And then lastly, you've got to have an open culture and reskill the workforce. Because, let's face it, if an AI-alien turns up at work, it's going to be a bit of a shock. Most people are going to be like, whoa, what's this? And not everyone is going to like the change. So building trust within your organization is key, as is in ensuring that people are brought along for the ride and that they're reskilled and they understand how to work with it and they can develop the right domain knowledge to actually be useful. We have a huge number of intelligent, enthusiastic, keen and technical people in scholarly communication, and I think we could make more use of them by really investing in development. So there we go, AI as a business transforming AI-alien. She can help, but she will only thrive and not drain your resources if you fully commit your organization. So Phil will be really relieved that I'm going to sum up. In summary, AI can do a lot of stuff. But you need a business case, and AI is not always the answer. We need to think differently about competitive advantage, partnerships, and vendors, and change our organization, the structure, people, processes, and data. Because the way that businesses and research work is going to look very, very different. But don't worry, everyone is facing this. So being honest and preparing now, even if you can't act now, preparing now will allow you to take advantage of the possibilities in the future. There are some really big and brave decisions, I think, that scholarly communication needs to make. And it's tough. But if you want your future to look more like ET and less like Alien, then you have just got to do it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much,
do you want the
Isabel.
clicker?
That made total sense.
Outrageous.
So I hope everybody's got their AI alien. Come on. There we go. There we go. We've found it. All right. View full screen mode. All right. Thanks very much. You probably could have done that more efficiently than I did.
So nearly my entire talk is going to be drilling down on Isabel's get the right business case. So I'm going to talk about how we at Highwire have tried to do that. I'm going to make 2 points first, though. I'm going to focus almost entirely on editorial challenges and opportunities. That is, the types of things that are the challenges and opportunities that journal editors have. There are lots of other possible uses of AI, for example, in the researcher workflow. I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to focus on the editorial opportunities because that's where we've run through a process and gathered some data. So in a way, I have some evidence, the data side, to bring to it. And the second prefatory comment is that I'm not going to be very strict about AI versus big data versus decision support. What we found in running through our process with editors is that they really just have problems that they want solved or opportunities that they want to capture. They know that it's woo-woo somewhere out in the future, but they really don't know much about AI. They might even be using it in their labs, but it's usually the grad students and the postdocs who are doing that. So I'm not going to be terribly strict about AI. Uh-oh. It looks like the builds aren't going to work. All right. So imagine that pink box doesn't exist right now. So about 2 years ago, AI zoomed onto the agenda of the scholarly publishers that Highwire works with this press release from Meta. And what it basically, a lot of people read it and inferred that Meta was suggesting that editors really could be replaced by machines because, after all, the machines outperformed the editors in selecting the very best papers. So you can imagine how editors felt about this. And what that did for us at Highwire was make us wonder, what are the actual use cases that editors would be interested in rather than being replaced? And so what we worked on was first framing the right questions. Rather than starting with the technology, what essentially, I've got a hammer, I've got to go find a nail to hit with it, which is, I think, some of what AI practitioners, especially in universities, are doing. We really started to think about, well, where did editors, could they get help? Where did they need to get help? And then finally, ultimately, where did they want to get help from AI? One of the regular displays of hubris among people in tech, and my colleagues in the room who've worked with me for 20 plus years can say I'm guilty of this too. That's okay. Is the assumption that we understand a workflow based on looking at the resulting product. So, for example, we technology folks understand what editors do by looking at the article that comes out at the end of the workflow. And all we have to do is make it look like that, and we've done our job. Well, a bit of a personal anecdote. Years before starting Highwire, I was responsible for computer services at Stanford. And one of the computer science professors castigated me and my organization because of our plodding progress in replacing a payroll system. It was taking us over a year to do. And his way of challenging me was basically to say that he could have one of his grad students in CS write that system over the weekend. Quote, "How hard can it be to write a check?" As if what a payroll system did was essentially write checks. And what we found in working with some AI suppliers was they would look at a paper that is an article coming out of a journal and say, how hard can that be to create that, to construct that? And I think that was totally the wrong thing to do. So I should, one of the curiosities about this anecdote I just told you is that the professor who said this to me, it was ironic because the computer science professor was a fellow named John McCarthy, who's widely known and credited as the father of artificial intelligence. And given the way he felt about me, he would probably be turning over in his grave seeing me give a talk on AI right now. So what we focused on was essentially to understand how to lead a journal. We had to go talk to editors themselves about doing that. What we did was put together a workshop, and I'll go into the format just a little, where we had these publishers and editors come together. The rule for this workshop was that you essentially had to bring your editor with you in order to attend. And the editor was usually the editor-in-chief of one of your journals or one of the associate editors who had a particular interest in this topic. And we put together this workshop. And you can see, if you can read this, that this is quite a variety of publishers up here. Commercial and society publishers, publishers who have one or two journals, publishers who have 15, publishers who have 50. So we had a good variety of voices in the room. And what we talked with them about was these 4 topics. This is the way we divided up the day. And we wanted to make sure that we went beyond topic number 3, which is where we were seeing a lot of people focus on, is essentially how do you handle papers. We really wanted to get into setting strategy and identifying the right people to be soliciting papers from. And then finally at the number 4, how do you interpret your results? If you make a change, how do you know that you've improved things? The format of this workshop was unlike anything we had done at Highwire for probably 15 years. We limited it to 40 people. Everyone was in the same room around a single table. Everyone could see each other. And we had the 15 publishers and editors sit together so that we would go around the table every time we had a topic we wanted to discuss. In other words, we wouldn't allow a few talkative people like me to dominate the whole conversation. We essentially required that everybody say something. And this worked pretty well. What it did was allow us to find out where there was consistency in the responses, because sometimes a person would just say, yeah, what she said. And that was okay. We didn't need to have you restate it, but it allowed us to say, yes, that ASM agrees with Cell Press on this. That was pretty helpful. So this is probably the best short version of what came out of the meeting. One of the editors said to us, with lots of people nodding, is what you can get AI to do for us is make long meetings shorter. And what did this mean? This meant bring evidence to the table so that we're not having faith-based discussions, anecdata as it's jokingly called now, so that we're actually having evidence-based discussions among editors who are trying to make a policy change. And a lot of what comes up after this is in this area. So these are the 4 areas that came out. These do not align, by the way, with the 4 questions. There's some alignment. Excuse me. Can you hand me my glass of water? I hope not. Yeah. Oh, it got quiet next door.
Everybody's still alive.
Okay. What's interesting, Isabel had, what was it? Predict, promote, provide, produce. I think I can structure these into predict, promote, predict, and provide. So just an interesting thought to do this. I'm going to drill into each one of these now. Probably worth a little bit of commentary is some of there is work going on in 3 of these 4 in AI now. And some of it's pretty good work, some of it's more advanced than others. At least as far as I could see, the one that is not covered is this thing that we've labeled community engagement. All the others, though, have work going on. The other thing that is maybe a little bit hard is that some areas are more advanced than others, and some areas produce more strategic value than others. For example, workflow productivity and efficiency. I think that's actually getting pretty advanced, and I'll show some examples of that. But it's not a place where there's a lot of strategic value. However, emergence, that is identifying newly emerging areas, there I'd say the work is just beginning, but it has huge strategic value for scoping journals, positioning editorial groups, and so on. So let me dive into each one of them. So what does journal performance mean? This is, of course, understanding how journals were performing, but it's relative to the marketplace as a whole. In other words, it's not looking at the journal's performance relative to its previous year. It's not predicting its next year. It's really looking at it in a marketplace as a whole. And you might say, well, isn't that what the JCR does? It says you're ranked number 2 in the field of neuropsychopharmacology or something like that. What came out of the discussion around this is that a lot of it has to do with the qualities of the data. The JCR is not sufficient for what people are trying to get at here. And that's because the change that they were interested in evaluating is often targeted well below the journal level to certain types of articles, to certain topics of articles within their field. And second, that if they make a change, if an editor makes a change, they want to see the impact of that change almost in real time. That is, they publish a set of articles, and 2 months later, they want to know, did that work? They don't want to wait for the next impact factors, or actually the impact factors 2 or 3 years out. So what I'd say is the journal impact factor it's a score, but it's not a tool. And what folks were looking for were tools that would work in this area. And there are some examples of these. This is the one that we've worked with Meta to deploy. among a set of about 15 of Highwire's publishers. Meta's rolled it out to others as well. So this is what they call a publisher dashboard. It's looking at journal performance close to real time. It's looking, so you're not getting a year-long lag in this. And it is essentially looking at 3 months worth of articles, a moving window of 3 months worth of articles, and identifying which articles are likely to be high impact, are predicted to be higher impact than other articles, and therefore whether the impact of your collection as a whole is trending up or trending down. It does some other things as well. What I just showed you there, that's snapshots from version 1. They're working on rolling out version 2 now. So the second topic was community engagement. And honestly, it was a challenge to find the right words to describe this. But what we're really talking about here is delivering what the editors wanted were tools that would help them identify, attract, and retain the best authors and the best papers, and to essentially recruit those ahead of submission. So not identifying the best papers after they had already been submitted, but figuring out who to talk to at a meeting to encourage the submissions. So this is author prospecting. And in studying this, we talked with 10 different journal editors about how they did this, and we found that there was essentially nothing in common, which made it damned hard to think about how you'd build tools in this area. And perhaps that's why I identify this area as relatively lagging in having AI tools to help with this. What it's about is, as we talked to the editors, what they wanted was something that would help them to know who to be talking to. Because a lot of editors, at least the ones we work with, are themselves not cold call folks. In other words, they don't want to go up to somebody they don't know at a conference and shake their hand and ask them to submit a paper. You have to help them do that. And so my feeling is that the best tool in this is essentially going to help people get over it being a cold call, and to switch that from if you will, a recruitment conversation, which is a personal sort of thing, to being a scientific conversation. In other words, give me, if I'm a recruiting editor, give me information about the person you want me to talk to so that I can have a scientific conversation with them, not a personal conversation. I can talk about their research, their recent publications, the work that their lab has funded and underway now, posters they've recently submitted. I also know whether I've rejected any of their papers recently, and so on. What I would have called in the pre-Trump era a dossier to help people over the social awkwardness of recruiting. And as I said, I don't think there's anything really underway here, but I think it's a ripe area. Another community engagement example is essentially being able to mine preprint servers for the papers that fit your journal and your goals, and then recruit those. And in fact, there are a number of journals that are doing this work manually now, and the question is, can we build tools that will help people do this in a more automated way? And I'm certain we can. This is almost not AI to do that. The third of the four areas is what we called emergence of the new. And here we're really, this is challenging. And here's why I want to highlight it as challenging. A lot of what's new in scientific fields is stuff that goes beyond the envelope of known vocabulary. That is, if you look at mesh headings, for example, in PubMed, that's a known vocabulary. And yes, we could probably build some pretty nice tools that look at mesh terms and see whether some of them are essentially trending the way things trend in Twitter. But I think here we're talking about vocabulary that exceeds the standard taxonomy, that falls outside of it. And that's really, really challenging. And it's challenging computationally. There are some examples of this going on. There is something called the League of Scholars, which is a commercial product. They have something they call WOW rankings, whole of web. Don't ask me why they call it that. But essentially, this is helping editors, publishers identify the superstars, usually the people. What our editors were interested in when we were talking to them about Emergence was they were focused mostly on topics. But very quickly, topics translates to people, because those are the people you're going to go and recruit for writing review articles and joining your editorial board and so on. So I think the personal side of this, the people side of it, is every bit as important, and maybe even more important than just following topics. Another example in Emergence is a tool that Meta has in-house that they call horizon scanning. And this is actually something that they've licensed from the Stanford Research Institute. And it's a very cool tool, but it's really hard to scale for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, that the vocabulary is essentially unbounded. What you have to do is process all the literature to find what the concepts are that are just, essentially pairs of words, and that are starting to blossom. I think there probably are commercial examples of concept emergence. I will bet that the various security agencies in the US and in other countries are monitoring our cell phone conversations for concept emergence. And so some of this black ops stuff really is on the horizon. Highwire is doing with Meta right now a concept emergence experiment where essentially we're working with associate editors in one of our largest journals, identifying what fields each of them work in, and then monitoring. Is that mine? Okay. Monitoring for new concepts and emerging concepts that are in their particular fields, so that we can give them some advanced intelligence about something that's in their area, but is just taking off. And then they, as an associate editor, can decide what actions to take. Right now, we're in the stage of gathering data. In other words, we've implemented an experiment. We're running the experiment to gather the data. Then we're going to present this to the associate editors this summer and have them give us feedback on, was this useful? Is this insightful? Or is it just another distraction? And obviously, if it works, we'll go from there. The last of the four areas is workflow efficiency and productivity. This is where it's actually running along pretty well. A lot of tools are starting to emerge here, although they're often point solutions rather than whole workflow solutions. But this is where we're able to start to shift effort that requires real field intelligence. That is the kind of stuff that grad students, postdocs, and researchers have to do some fairly mechanical tasks that can be routinized, and AIs can be trained on it. So checklist validation, screening articles, identifying whether articles really should just be rejected as being out of scope, identifying reviewers, image integrity analysis, and so on. Okay, I think that'll work. We have examples of this. Meta has a tool they call bibliometric intelligence that operates in this area. It essentially allows you to feed a submitted article to their AI, which will then give you information about its prediction for impact, recommended reviewers, and other things that could also be quite interesting. For example, if you're a publisher that has 50 journals, let's say, and they're all in different, they're all in a single field, but related, but not the kind of thing where any one of your editors understands the scope of all of your other journals. An article comes in, let's say this is the American Chemical Society. An article comes in, is submitted to JACS, the sort of flagship journal. It's going to be rejected. Where do you cascade it to? Well, that's the kind of thing that an AI tool can help with and say, here are the top 5 journals that should evaluate this paper. Another example is statistical reviews. So there's a tool called Stat Reviewer. I've seen it mostly applied in social sciences so far, but I understand there's some people who are starting to work on applying it in the STM areas. Classification. Sorry, this is really faded, but we covered a little bit about classification previously. Unsilo has a nice tool to develop, what you call them, micro collections?
Yeah.
Yep. Micro collections?
Yeah.
Okay.
Microsites.
Microsites. Essentially, being able to process your content database against a new vocabulary. And I think what Unsilo, lots of companies have done this kind of work. But what Unsilo has done is put a UI on it that's actually usable by subject matter experts, not technical experts. And I think that is a great leap forward. So thank you.
Thanks, John. That was great. Yeah, and the Unsilo stuff is particularly interesting to me, particularly around the micro sites and micro collection stuff. I mean, it's one of the things that we're interested in Emerald because we have this idea about real impact and aligning ourselves to sustainability goals and things of that nature. And it's a way to kind of, you could imagine like a climate science pop-up site or a
new topic comes
yeah,
up.
yeah.
And you want to see what you have in that area.
Yeah.
You can't use whatever old vocabulary you had.
Yeah.
But something can identify the patterns.
Yes. Yeah.
We probably could have used these kinds of tools with SARS, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
We've been called that before.
Yeah. So taxonomies, in a sense, or traditional taxonomies, are lag indicators of what the scholarly landscape actually looks like. So we have some time for questions. We've got one microphone, which we'll have to kind of bounce backwards and forwards. Oh, we've got a radio mic as well. So I'll have to use this in the audience. So I have one or two questions, but I think it's probably a good idea to see if we have some questions from the audience first. Does anybody have any thoughts, any hands going up before I resort to moderators' questions? Sorry? So questions can be about anything that you've heard, or it can be...
Anthony's saying, isn't John going to speak?
I will speak.
He will speak,
I can speak,
but he will be speaking after the break, yes.
Okay.
All right, so we have a question back here. I'm going to be the microphone person as well as the moderator.
So I'm just curious if there's been any experiments with social science content. This has been largely focused on hard sciences. And is that ontology problem particular to social science? Oh, sorry. Is the ontology problem that we're talking about, the names for things, is that a particular challenge to social science, and that's why we really haven't seen many experiments in those fields?
So I only have a little bit of a commentary on that. It's a good question. The one example that I did show from Stat Reviewer, my understanding is that is it was originally built to work in social science, but that's not a vocabulary tool in particular. It's looking at methodologies to see if they're appropriate. So it may be that vocabulary is particularly challenging in the social sciences because my impression not being a social scientist, is that its vocabulary is less controlled than in physical sciences and life sciences. And I think that's just more challenging. So words have multiple meanings depending on context, which of course AI can handle, but it needs a lot more training to do that reliably. You don't use individual words, you look at noun phrases, and you may have to look at context within a sentence to know that, this is, I better not try and give an example, it will be foolish, but, so I think it's more challenging, but it's not impossible. If Google seems to be able to rank search results in social sciences, and Google Scholar can. So my guess is this is problems that can be resolved.
Actually, Clarivate, John, do you have some thoughts about that? Sorry, we've got one John S. and another John S. So I'm struggling to separate the two when I'm talking about them. So we've decided we're going to go with Clarivate John and Highwire John.
That's not the company rebrand, by the way. Just to add. Yeah, well, that will come. I think it's more a perspective of, can you actually capture the content in the first place? So if you look through the lens of, Garfield, as introduced by Phil, and I think you were referencing impact factor, and that was used to help, look at large content sets. So as journals are coming in, can we put an indicator on them in order to understand and to pass off for editorial decisions. And that was from a content perspective, i.e., can we acquire new content? In the field of social sciences, from Clarivate's perspective, we have a lot of social science content. If you put it through the lens of kind of impact factor, citation metrics, generally, these indicators which aren't kind of AI as Phil described it, they're not as robust. But that's not to say that we can't mine social science content to find, kind of trends. And in particular, if you look at, emerging areas of research, I think you can start applying, AI techniques, cluster modeling, for example, to uncover, what is actually being produced and written in social science. But with all data sets, in particular AI, the larger the data set, the better. So it's always a question on, how much data can you have, and then, subsequent to that, can you then apply these techniques to that in order to actually understand and classify it?
Yeah, I think the comment about the larger data sets being important is worth repeating. I think all three of us would comment on that. It's one of the reasons that Highwire's decided to partner on AI with Meta and with Google, because they have very large data sets. When I look at the areas that our publishers wanted us to work in, none of them wanted to work only within their own journal context. As I said, market share was a big topic for journal performance. Well, that's not something that is resolved within the context of a single journal. So you had to have a large data set, PubMed scale, Clarivate scale, and so on.
This is ridiculous, isn't it? I would add to that, doing some reading on various machine learning textbooks and things like that, and there are various numbers around, like you may need around even 5,000 labeled examples for a category to start getting good results, and you only start getting really, really sometimes meaningful or human level results, sometimes with data sets of over 10 million and things like that. So maybe that also applies to social sciences, like if you've got words being used in different contexts, depending on which deep learning technique you need, you'll need very different types of data sets, but they can be huge, and that's a very limiting factor.
So I have a question. So we've talked a lot about the possibilities of AI, and one of the things that happens, you've mentioned this before, John, when new technologies emerge, is that we all kind of try and find ways of using them, and we get very excited about them. Can you talk a little bit about the potential risks perhaps about getting overexcited in too short a term about these technologies? Is there any kind of indicators of which areas of innovation are going to stick and which areas of innovation are going to be kind of a flash in the pan, what's going to fall down the chasm, those sorts of issues? Because I think a lot of people are going to be looking at these and thinking, well, there's lots of different possibilities. What's really going to be, the thing that's going to be actually useful and is really going to move the needle for us?
So I think one of the things that I think was really important in Isabel's talk is don't invest in AI yourself, and especially living as I do in Silicon Valley, it's really intriguing to look at this and think, yes, why don't we hire an AI person? But first of all, it's really expensive to do that. Second, if you tried to hire them in Silicon Valley, you'd be competing with all sorts of startups that have hundreds of millions of dollars, as well as Google and others. So I think it's really important to look at where AI is and how fast it's moving. But not to fall into the trap of expecting it to produce results right away. Gartner has a picture, they call it the hype cycle, and AI is, in the Gartner hype cycle, AI is just past the peak of inflated expectations. Can you find that?
I'm not sure as I have it. Keep talking. See if I can find it.
Which is interesting because it suggests that you really, if you're going to go down this path, you have to be prepared for some disappointment, for some rework, and so on. It's not just going to be another production. Yeah, so there's the picture. And AI is, can you point to, it's machine learning. It's just past the peak.
Just past the peak, sitting here.
Yeah. So what's interesting is Gartner predicts that it's 3 to 5 years out from really being productive, which means at that point it's sort of production ready. Everybody will know how to use it and have straightforward implementations. So they've focused primarily on machine learning as the technology that is advancing most quickly. I think that's probably true. For example, we probably are not going to invest in machine vision the way Waymo is with autonomous vehicles. But a lot of our work being text-based will probably work well for machine vision. Just one other comment. The thing that I think is really important when something is at this point in the hype cycle is that you always have an idea about how you're going to validate the results. And that you treat it as a scientific project. In other words, imagine that you were going to publish an article in one of your own journals about some AI innovation. You'd have to show the data. You'd have to prove that it's at least as good, if not better, than the best available alternatives. So I'd say we must consider validation as part of all these projects.
Oh my God, there's so many things I could pick up there. One thing I was going to say about hiring the right type of people, which again is obviously a kind of strategic problem. What I think is hilarious is that now startups that are being bought, you can often charge what's in the range of £5 to £10 million per AI expert is the kind of, if you were trying to, companies investing in mergers and acquisitions are in the AI area at the moment. And even if you do get those types of people in, if you decide, look, I'm going to put aside 150 grand for like a bloody good one, and actually that's not even that good, they're probably not going to stay. Like in your organisation, they're not going to want to hang out in this environment. If they're the sort of people at the cutting edge, they are going to want to be pushed in an environment that's a little bit different from some of the. You can't just silo them in one little area and be like, can you do your AI over there? It's never going to work. But that means what I think we should be doing is training people up to work with AI, because it's not just about the programming and the development of the techniques. A big part of it is you have a huge number of roles for translators and people that can understand how it works. Someone else, maybe the vendor, does the development, but you have to have people in the business, who know how to use it, how to interpret it, and also you have the really deep domain expertise. And we can definitely work on developing the people with really deep domain expertise. So you sort of, and I think all of this actually maps to what are called Wardley maps, which I don't know if you've heard of, where you can sort of plot utility to the user on one spectrum, and on the other one, on one axis, and the other one is commoditization. And we should all be focusing our attention on the areas where we can truly add value and that we have the expertise to act and develop the best products. We should be focusing on those types of areas. And like I mentioned briefly, no one here really wants to be developing their brand new machine learning techniques. Like, that's not our area of expertise. You leave that to someone else, and then you probably the best use for communication is to take advantage of commoditized things as they become more available, which is why it is in the realm of achievability now that we can start to see actual use cases. Just going to say, though, you asked about emerging technologies, and I think obviously one of the biggest ones, and I don't know if we'll talk about this or later, is maybe trust and explainable AI and the black box kind of problem, because I think this is going to be one that we see a huge amount of development in over the next few years, and that will tie in with validation and how we want to, what kind of validation we want to, how much we want any example to prove that it can do what it says it's going to do. And I saw just the other day, there's a really project with UC Berkeley and University of Amsterdam, Facebook and people, they've developed an artificial intelligence system that can point to why it made, it's the first one that can point to why it made a decision and explain why it did it. So for example, it has like the little pictures of someone surfing, whatever, and then it's got heat maps for the parts of the picture that it used to make the decision, and then it says, I think they're surfing. It's surfing because it is in water and there are rough waves or something like that, and it explains what it does in quite simple language. And so this is an area I think that we're going to see a lot of kind of very interesting development.
So we're nearly out of time before the break, but we have time for just one more quick question. And Joanne's been
Patient.
across the road
Patiently. So I had a question about training. So we're talking a fair amount about how you can't have the AI person off in a corner. And for most publishers, our workforce is pretty distributed. If you're focusing on the editor as having some of the highest impact, this is maybe 5 to 10% of their day. They're in any far-flung country, anywhere in the world. And rolling out even the greatest tool can have limited adoption. So how are you thinking about the rollout of some of these tools and getting folks engaged so that we can really experience the impact?
That's a good question.
It's a good question. Do you have any good answers?
I can try, but
I can try to.
I think it's, if you put it in the context of, kind of AI at the point of adoption, so, just personal anecdote, I took a Lyft, which is, kind of an Uber equivalent, which is using... But better, okay. But the point was the guy's using a Google map, to, tell or to predict which route he should take to get, to the hotel. He overrides the suggestion because there's 3 different levels you can actually drive through Chicago to get here. Yes. He was wrong, and then he went back to, the Google map. But my point here is that, he's using AI without even thinking about it as in a tool, to aid him in his or her decision. And I think in terms of, kind of rolling out products, to editors, for example, I may not necessarily know what that particular product is right now. People are working on things, as John shared in his presentation. But I think the point is it's got to be simple enough just to use almost without thinking and intuitively. And I think if we can do that, then it will be successful. If we don't, we'll have the many examples of where AI is just gone down a dead end and not really delivered what it could potentially do so.
So it's kind of product, or not product, or it's about making it about a solution-oriented thing rather than a technology-oriented thing. So in a sense, we've organised this seminar about AI, and the take-home is let's stop talking about AI.
I think that's right where Isabel
That's
started.
where Isabel started off, yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good question. It's been a challenging one to grapple with. The two thoughts somewhat opposing. I think what we're going to be seeing in the short term is more of what I call point solutions, things that are quite narrowly focused at very specific problems, like find me the right reviewers for this paper. Things that are really narrow, because the more comprehensive stuff is going to be much harder to validate and roll out. The second thought is, in order to get it rolled out, you have to put it in the workflow. It can't be something you're asking somebody to do also. And that is also challenging, because making changes in the way editors work, everybody in the room probably knows you don't get it harder than that. You could, well, changing authors is harder. So to come up with something that will work in the workflow smoothly, it has to be a solution to a problem they have, as opposed to a problem they didn't know they had. So that's a challenging topic.
Yeah, just quickly.
Just very quickly, I think exactly it's all about use cases, and I think actually maybe using this sort of AI tool will start making people ask all kinds of questions about it that they don't really need to and that aren't important. I organised the AI session plenary at Alps, and one of the guys there from EchoBox was talking about how his tool was being used in newsrooms, and he said that people were actually thrilled when their tool came in, because suddenly they were able to do all kinds of stuff that they couldn't do before. It was incredibly useful, it was great, but I don't think they went in and was like, this AI thing is going to change your life. So I imagine we all need to become like salespeople within the organisation and think about use cases and communication and sell what the tool can do within our organisation to get all the necessary buy-in. And I know you're doing that type of thing at Emerald, so.
Yeah, selling talking about the business cases and the use cases, selling the problem that it solves, or selling the solution. And it's true whether you're talking about AI or whether you're talking about data generally, or whether you're talking about blockchain, which keeps getting asked about a lot. And all these things, it's a mistake, isn't it, to just talk about what the technology is and what it does and how we can get power out of it. We need to be breaking it down into the actual problems that people have. So that is an excellent conclusion to the first half of the seminar, and we've kind of come full circle, because as John pointed out, that's the starting point that Isabel brought us to this, is that we don't have an AI problem, we have a strategy problem. So we're going to take a quick networking break for 20 minutes. I have my fingers crossed that there's coffee outside. Hopefully there is. If there's not, then round the back there's a Starbucks. So hopefully we don't have to resort to paying for our own coffee, and there might be some outside. And we'll see you in 20 minutes, which will be 20 past 10.
So my name's John Stroll. I'm the Director of Research Analytics at Clarivate Analytics. Kind of what that means in practice, I work on the Insights product team. Insights is a bibliometric platform that we provide to our customers. I've been with the company for around 14 years now. My background is in sales and marketing, and I'm relatively new to product, being in the product team for about almost 18 months now. So as kind of the panel and I, or I and the panel, kind of put together this session, or started thinking about this session, we really wanted to take a kind of a vendor agnostic approach. Kind of in that, kind of one, it's a conference. Two, we want to work collaboratively together to kind of unpick and uncover, what AI actually is. As you can kind of sense from the discussions, it's kind of that AI is very hot right now, but there's kind of so many different ways and applications and approaches that it can be at times quite confusing. So I think, and hopefully you'll see it kind of emerging as we've been talking today about, kind of one, setting out that kind of that strategic vision in a way, or kind of what is it that you actually want to do. So in terms of what AI actually is, it's a tool that enables you to do something smarter, quicker that you weren't able to do before, and trying to figure out how that actually fits into, kind of your workflow, which John covered very nicely with the various publisher case studies or use cases that he's described. And I think that gives kind of more of this tangible sense of, okay, well, perhaps we can use AI to solve a certain problem. In terms of my role here today, I'm looking at techniques and applications. So I will put my hand up to say I'm not a data scientist, kind of by trade. So a lot of this I have, gone through and almost coached it in language or in terms that I can understand, and I'm hoping to actually share that insight with you today. Kind of at Clarivate Analytics, we do have a data science team. They're based in San Francisco, and they also work remotely, actually. So we have a number of data scientists, kind of around the globe. And kind of within the newly formed ISI, we have actually kind of hired a new data scientist. So we are, kind of actively putting new people into the team, which is great because hopefully it means that, we can start unpicking these problems. But it does fall down to, okay, well, kind of one, what challenge you're actually trying to solve. And really is it the $64,000 question? That's the real question which you need to ask yourself. And in a way, just to reflect is, kind of as you look at AI and what it means, and for large firms such as Clarivate Analytics, for example, you have this innovator's dilemma, which is when do you put your chips in? When do you play big in this space? Because we have existing customers, existing products and services which work very well, but we also have this new emerging technology which can change. And it can change very quickly. And I think that's, I'm hoping that I can explore some of those technologies now to help uncover, kind of what are these big changes which may be happening, and how do we actually apply those in the respective lines of business that we're focusing on today. So in terms of, kind of neatly, surmising that introduction, I just wanted to, kind of define AI. Again, I know you've already had 2 explanations. Hopefully a third may, kind of get it right. This time I'm sure we'll have a fourth from Pauline. I'll go through some of the techniques, and again, these are, I'm not going to go kind of deep into kind of the clustering techniques and N vectors, which you need kind of possibly a degree higher than myself to understand. But I will try to, or I will kind of suggest reframing AI as more of a predictive capability to help kind of you understand where AI can be used. And then I'll just reference, kind of some of the accelerators, which is why we're actually sitting here today talking about AI. Because AI is, from my next slide, is not necessarily a new idea. I kind of been going back to the literature. It was, kind of the phrase was coined by this guy John McCarthy back in 1955. I think then there was a very large conference. A lot of this stuff is up online, and I've tried to reference some links throughout my presentation. Just for your own kind of learning. But there was a very large conference which, they kind of got all the movers and shakers together in the AI field to actually decide, well, what is artificial intelligence? And I took a kind of a screen grab from Web of Science. So I just searched artificial intelligence in Web of Science, and you can see kind of on the right all the different categories or the fields that artificial intelligence actually falls in. So in very broad terms, kind of it's this discipline which specifically focuses on computer science, but quickly expands into many other disciplines, and kind of I think this slide reflects it far better than I can explain it now. So there's this long tail of where AI can actually be used. And generally when we talk about AI, kind of leaping down the slide, one kind of there's this notion of general AI versus narrow or applied AI. And I think a lot about what we've been talking about today, and you'll see in my presentation, is more about narrow AI. So these are these point solutions. So, so what can I do better, right now using kind of a technique? Whereas this kind of this notion of general AI, which is, I think somebody had termed it, I can't remember the reference here, is the holy grail. So it's effectively, kind of having a kind of a sentiment robot, being able to deliver or have a panel discussion. And maybe that's a Turing test updated, is, can you put a robot on a panel and get away with it? So you'll have to, question at the end of this is which one of us is a robot, but we'll leave that for later. And this, so when we're looking at this, or the screenshot of that brain there, this is, really describing what kind of a human brain does, kind of almost intuitively. So many of you, I'm sure, have children, and you can, as you watch them grow and develop, they learn how to do things, and they learn on repeat by doing things, repeatedly. So I have a 6-month-old son who's trying to pick things up right now, and he's trying to learn how to sit, and he's trying to hold himself steady, and these are all things that you can almost watch him grow daily. So he's getting better actually grabbing things, and in a way, general AI is being able to kind of do all of this and apply one set of learning into another kind of discipline or another kind of another area, which is why we can have very good. I think we can have a computer can beat the world kind of chess player at chess or at Go, for example, but they can't go and get you a cup of coffee from Starbucks. That's a different job, and it requires a different set of tools. But a person can do all of this, usually competently, depending on the time in the morning. So looking at narrow AI, I wanted to try to unpick what this actually means, or what it meant to me actually as I was going through this. And so narrow AI is trying to take apart what intelligence actually is. So kind of putting the artificial into the intelligence there. Kind of the domains I just reflect up there. Are very broad. So again, kind of today's talk, it's not just around kind of publisher specific. It's around kind of what AI can be used. And a lot of the time we're already using AI without even necessarily realizing it. For example, you turn on Netflix and a recommendation pops up. That's an AI recommendation coming to you. So that's built on an algorithm suggesting something that you used to watch. So as you kind of go through this, or kind of this unpicking of kind of what intelligence is, I kind of coined it kind of thinking, learning, reasoning, and applying. And these are broad brush terms, so, and kind of within kind of this notion of thinking, you have kind of, quote, classic artificial intelligence. So this is kind of giving computers the ability to actually mimic humans. It's called cognitive analytics. And this is where, kind of a computer is actually generating a hypothesis, kind of which is exposed as a recommendation. It ranks it, so it suggests it to you. And it's not necessarily led by rules or queries. And kind of that's kind of the old way of programming, where you had to program a rule in order to get, kind of the computer to do a task. Kind of the switch here with AI is that you can program the computer to do the task, and then it starts doing it on repeat, and it starts doing it for you. So it's actually unpicking insights which we didn't have before, and that's this kind of notion of thinking, or if you look in the field, cognitive analytics, or I think IBM and their supercomputer. This is kind of the area which is called Watson. This is the area that they're really inhabiting. Learning, this notion of learning. So this is machine learning, kind of also kind of drips into deep learning. And machine learning and deep learning is what we've been talking a lot about today. And these are just, some machine learning in kind of its very, kind of neat sense is, kind of how do you classify an object? So how do you, kind of look at a picture and tell that this picture is going to be something? So you need to classify something before you can actually describe what it is. So machine learning helps us kind of classify objects, speech, pictures, whatever it may be that needs to be classified, we need to get it classified. And then deep learning is this kind of this application. We just, kind of the buzzword here is this neural networks. So the computer's actually starting to think, and it mimics kind of almost kind of the human brain with all these different networks. And when we're using networks, and you kind of put it in the category of reasoning. Now, kind of the computer isn't reasoning in kind of the human form of kind of intuition and extrapolating meaning from a situation. It's kind of repeatedly running the same question again. It's kind of this continual feedback loop just to adjust itself. And this neural network, or this deep learning, kind of just through sheer computational power, is able to come up much more quickly with insights than we're able to do before. And then kind of the last area is around applying it. Kind of I put kind of the bucket of data science into this area. So not kind of true kind of AIs or narrow AIs, we would see it. because data science is more about kind of as a discipline. It's what you can be trained in doing. And I think there's actually a recent course which came out. It's now free online. I should have put the link, and my apologies for not including it. But you can then go and learn how to be a data scientist, so you can start to learn about kind of these statistics in these different visualizations in order to explain and understand data more effectively. And I think this is what John has been referring to. Kind of in the concept models, which is, from a publisher's view, if I wanted to, identify the next rising star in my field, can I use, kind of, is there a particular statistical technique that can help me do that? If so, what is it? And the data scientist can help you unpick that and then apply it to your problem. I mean, of course, just speaking beyond this framework, AI or kind of does also include robotics, smart machines. Kind of drones, this all falls into the field of, quote, artificial intelligence. And again, kind of each of these is, kind of answering a specific question which, kind of the person or persons is asking of it. So in terms of kind of what is narrow AI? So again, kind of it's a busy slide, but I think it's helpful to try to go through some of these, and I'll explain by using the examples, because I think that's the best way to help kind of understand what it is that we're looking at here. And maybe one of the call-outs is that, kind of as perhaps a practitioner, you don't necessarily need to understand, how it works. You just need to know it will work and it can apply to a certain situation. So said differently is, you enjoy watching TV, and I can see somebody's got a laptop in front of them. You enjoy using it, but before buying it, you don't go, okay, well, which microchip am I working, and then how do the transistors connect? You don't necessarily need to know all that in order to actually use or apply the product. And I think the same is true with AI. Is kind of there are specialists who can help you understand and recommend these different techniques. And of course you can read and learn up on them, but you don't necessarily need to know kind of in the weeds, kind of all of this, kind of the different approaches, and that's why we have data scientists or specialists who help do some research to then come back with recommendations. And again, kind of the application or in narrow AI is using kind of a mixture of these in order to answer a problem. So, looking, for example, kind of heuristics. So heuristics is just an approach to kind of get to the best possible kind of solution as quickly as I can. So kind of in layman's terms, it's kind of a very rough search. So if I'm searching for artificial intelligence in Web of Science, just typing in that, in a very broad brush, kind of gets me what I need quickly. And there's some tricks in AI, which is, kind of using heuristic techniques, which is kind of getting an answer to a problem very quickly. So it's, kind of, are there any shortcuts that we can use from looking at or mining data? Kind of within AI, there's this approach called support vector machines. So this is where we're looking at kind of a machine learning algorithm which helps classify objects or things. So an example here is spam email. Nobody likes getting spam email, and we'll probably get less of it now that Europe has decided to take action. But I'm sure it will still come through. And then how do you get rid of it? Well, the email needs to be classified. So there are algorithms which help kind of remove that and clear that out from your inbox. These neural networks that we've discussed on the prior slide, which is kind of how do you see patterns in data? So this is kind of this notion of using a neural network to help understand it. They use something called back propagation, which is kind of a binary yes or no. So kind of if object is this, yes, I will go this way. If no, then I'll go that way. And again, kind of a very clear example here is credit card fraud, which again has been kind of in play for many years, but if you're coming from overseas, for example, to Chicago, you may have got a call from your bank to say, what is that credit card transaction? Why were you at the bar last night? You don't normally go to a bar in Chicago, kind of midweek. And again, that's just an example of where, the credit card companies are using neural networks to help kind of identify who you are, create a cluster of expected behavior, and then, flag issues where, kind of where that's not to type. I won't kind of explain Markov decision process, but this is more just to kind of aid robots, so kind of actually helping robots decide, or how do I unpick something. So I think your example earlier of how do I escape from a jungle at nighttime when it's dark, a data scientist would be using the Markov decision process to help build into, well, if you fall over, you need to get up and go back to your camp and then start over. So that's a rule that you need to implicitly program in to to help unpick and guide, kind of the robot or the machine to do something. And then lastly, the natural language processing. So this is, how do you interact with your computer? So right now we're busy tapping away. Some of us may use speech recognition, but we also have chatbots. So you can type and you can talk to a chatbot online. Wall Street Journal has them. I think we have our own online support. You can start to type in. And the point here is that, this is, how do you interact with a computer? And there's ways, or there are techniques, and there's this field to actually uncover this and improve it. So going kind of more deeply into machine learning, this is kind of the one which is showing most promise today. I kind of just flashed up. I don't think you can actually have a presentation on AI without having a picture of a dog or a cat, because I think it helps explain the problem. But kind of this is the dog. Yes, we know it is a dog. So what's that thing next to it, which also has 4 legs and is kind of furry as well? And I've taken this example from somebody else's. But the point here is that there are rules, and we need to train, and we need to help explain kind of this machine, or kind of help explain the algorithm in order to kind of answer the problem better. So there's this, you do need to have training data. So kind of how do you create an algorithm? You've got to train it. I think there's a question about social science data earlier. Secondly, you need to have input data to actually predict that, is this the right answer? And then you need to validate it. So you need to actually feedback and improve on that. So there's this kind of continual loop cycle which exists within machine learning. And a lot about this is kind of taking data and then actually turning it into intelligence, which is something you didn't know before. And I think that's kind of one of the key points with this is kind of, can we use machine learning or AI as we're kind of colloquially using it to tell us something that we didn't know before? And I think that's the real power here, which is not necessarily telling you that that's a very comfortable chair rather than a dog, but it's you can apply it to kind of your own instance of how do I find that rising star from this panel of kind of people who've submitted to my journal, for example. So, kind of thinking around what machine learning or deep learning provides, there's this kind of this notion that they actually provide predictions. Potentially, kind of think through kind of the workflow or, kind of the problems that you're looking at, kind of as kind of, can we use kind of this algorithm to predict and to actually improve kind of the actual workflow. So here, if you're looking, I think we've referred to it earlier as a point solution. But effectively, what machine learning is helping us to do is answering a particular step in a problem. And I think the opportunity really exists to to rethink workflows. It's not to say I need to apply AI to my kind of current product. At times you can. For example, within our own suite of products, we have a recommendation engine called Manuscript Matcher, and it can suggest a journal for a researcher to publish in. That sits on our EndNote platform, and it's a nice small tool, but it's effectively, that's a bolt-on, which is a piece of narrow AI designed to solve a problem, which is, how do I choose which journal to publish in? So, but I think there's this opportunity to actually think far more broadly about kind of the workflow, and then what are these workflows, and do they need to be re-engineered? And there's kind of a link there to, to one from Google, which has over 1,000 projects currently on the go, looking at these new techniques. So potentially, if you're not doing something, you should be thinking about it. You don't necessarily have to take action, but it's just to be aware that there's a lot of activity going on. But then kind of also, thinking around prediction. So yes, it's great to have a prediction, but they can also carry risks. And kind of not up on the, one of the issues with machine learning is, or deep learning, is that we can't see into the algorithmic black box to understand, kind of how is it making these predictions. We don't necessarily know that. You can only see it from the outputs that it creates. So just a couple of examples here. One from the New Scientist, other from Fortune, where in Google advertising it has race and gender bias. So, for example, CEO jobs is shown more frequently to men rather than to women. Why? Maybe because men are clicking on them more, I don't know. But, kind of inherent in there is a gender bias, which kind of now exists in the algorithm. There's kind of IBM facial recognition, which is more effective for white men. I think it worked 99% of the time, but if you're a person of color, and female, it only worked 35% of the time. So there we've got, we've got constraints within the algorithm. It doesn't work. It doesn't work effectively for a, kind of a very large group, effectively half the world of people. So there's a question there. And there's another one kind of in the US, which is this feedback loop where it actually sent more police officers to poorer neighborhoods because of this kind of feedback loop, even though their crime wasn't necessarily being committed in these neighborhoods. So again, you've got algorithms which are helping us uncover, identify kind of on new insights, but actually this is posing to be kind of real problems and challenges. And then also kind of the algorithmic discrimination in advertising. So Facebook actually took it down. This was back in 2017. But you were able to exclude certain racial groups from your advertising, which is, of course, it's strictly illegal. It should not happen. But it is possible. And again, this goes back to kind of how people are classified using our algorithms within the platforms that we're using. So again, it kind of raises almost some broader challenges about how should these machine learning techniques be used. We know we're at the cusp of this AI explosion, but it does kind of raise questions of exactly what are we exploding. And then kind of just my last slide, these are some of the main trends which have which I think have contributed to why we're all sitting here today. And kind of on the, I think your left, the kind of the big purple buttons are, kind of things you've probably read about, heard about. I don't necessarily need to go through them in big, kind of in heavy detail, but kind of the call out here with cloud computing. The reason why we're able to do a lot of AI now is that we do have. Well, one is they're very data-driven, and we've already talked about the need to have big data sets. So, we weren't able to do that before kind of the cloud existed. Kind of this notion of big data, we're now kind of producing far more data than ever before. But again, it's now available electronically. That's a recent trend which is starting to fuel this kind of this emergence. So we're able to actually apply the AI techniques, which we talked about previously, kind of to these data sets. I think you reference kind of AI API. So you don't necessarily need to have an AI expert in-house. You can actually buy an API. I think that I reference it here is the IBM Watson. And then again, kind of from Google, a lot of this is open source. So there's kind of this very, there's a movement to be open, to share, and to be free with algorithms. So if you are interested in using this, you can kind of call on Watson to actually provide a service to you, or you can, kind of use Google TensorFlow to help give you some machine learning algorithms. So again, I guess you would need to have some background in data science and able to unpick this, but my point being is that these are tools which are available now to start and look at. And then lastly, kind of the other kind of buzzword which happens is kind of the Internet of Things, which is where devices are now connected and you have sensors kind of being embedded, for example, into automotives to allow cars to self-drive. And again, this is kind of another net new addition, which we've just haven't ever seen before. And again, I think this kind of this confluence of these trends is giving us the ability to actually analyze data. So then in practical terms, it means we're analyzing it through kind of the workflows which we have. So and I think it really does go back to what is your workflow, and can you make that more effective by using these AI techniques. Oh, sorry, just my last one here, which I'll just flash up very quick. I think I'm over time.
You are.
But it's just kind of highlighting Google's growth in publications. I think this one I think is from Google Scholar, but the article does reference Web of Science, and I looked within Insights, our tool, and yes, their citation impact is 4 times the world average. So Google is publishing a lot of hot research in artificial intelligence, so it's definitely one to look at. They bought a company for $400 million in 2014. I think you can see that as the explosion in research. And then again, I think there's just additional ways that we want to think more about this, which is looking at, can we go or can we extend matching variable beyond what we currently are already using? Kind of this notion of broader access. This is, to your point on making AI every day. You don't want to think about the algorithm you're using. You just want the algorithm to help you get to your hotel on time, for the meeting, which is your, the Google Maps explanation, or this deductive reasoning. So, can we actually get new ideas from limited data sets? So not having to rely on such large data sets, because again, that's kind of a problem and can be a challenge to some people in inquiring. I won't kind of play the YouTube, but I think it will be on the slides, but it's worth also just sharing a DARPA perspective. Put a nice video up on YouTube. I think this was from 2016. It's about 5-6 minutes long, and would recommend you taking a look there as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was great. That was fantastic. So now you're going to have to all bear with me and cross your fingers, because we have had a series of technical issues during the morning, but we've managed to kind of mostly muddle through. And now the next speaker is supposed to be presenting remotely, but unfortunately the GoToMeeting isn't working completely correctly. So she should be able to hear us, and she should be able to speak, and we should be able to hear her. Are you there, Pauline?
Yeah.
Hey.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Pauline. Sorry?
Can you hear me?
She doesn't sound like a robot. Yes, that's right. She's the robot that we have remotely to pretend that she. We'll see if we get away with it.
At the end, we find out it's good.
That's not right, Pauline, is it? You're an actual real person.
Yeah, I'm a real person. I'm actually French. I think you can hear it from my accent. And I'm not an AI. I'm real for sure.
All right. So because things aren't working entirely correctly with the screen sharing technology, Pauline's going to give her talk, and she's going to be going through her slides at her desk in France. Paris. Are you in Paris, Pauline?
Yes, I'm in Paris.
In Paris. And every time she gets to the end of her slide, she's going to say "next slide," and I'm going to press this button here. So we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. Is that all right, Pauline? In which case, I will let you carry on, and I will be your button-pushing robot.
Okay, great. Then yeah, well, I'm really happy to be with you today, even virtually with you. It's great. I actually only heard the speaker before me. It was really, really interesting. And I have so much pressure now on my own, but I will do my best. So next slide, please.
Done.
I guess you're like, who is My Science Work? So yeah, My Science Work is my company, obviously, and I'm joining it on only last January, so I'm still a rookie there. But this company was founded in 2010 by a nanotechnology engineer, because she was thinking that the world of science was was not open enough, actually. She had trouble to find publication and to communicate with other scientists. So she found My Science Work, first of all, to communicate more about science between scientists, but also with like the normal people, kinda. And so yeah, basically My Science Work was a social network platform for scientists. And now, since a few years, we start providing a suite of solutions for researchers, but not only, also private sector R&D company for the management of their scientific data. And you can see some like key numbers. We have about 7 million publications on our website, any field in science, so it's quite a lot. And we're still a small company, but we dreamed about being bigger, of course. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'm here today to try to show some trends for the future in the product and service about decision making with AI. Next slide, please. So I'm going to try to like split my speech in 3 main points. So first of all will be the data management. Second of all, the peer review methods, and then the visibility and the discoverability of the data. If you can go to the next slide. So yeah, what I say, I'm going to start with the data management. Because even before even thinking about applying artificial intelligence on the data for decision making, we need to think about the data themselves. You cannot have anything if your data is not clean, if your data is like, you have to be able to read things into your data. So we witness a change of the paradigm between big data versus actionable data. And actionable data is actually the data you have collect, and is it clean? So this clean data, you can actually use them and apply machine learning, for example. And you have also to understand that this work is a huge work. Like, you cannot just say, oh, that's okay, I have some data. It's easy, we're going to put some robots and we're going to have like an awesome tools for decision making. No, it's actually a little bit difficult than this. And we actually also see the amount of data raising and still growing now. So it's really difficult for institutions right now to manage the data. So I say we can apply them machine learning. For example, you can use them to deduplicate the data, which is really important if you want to have good results. You can also standardize them, which is really important as well. I will be more specific about the standardization later. For example, there are really easy for you to visualize it. It's you can think about the smart crawler on the web pages. So that's machine learning. It's gonna help you to go through your data. So as I said, I'm going to go to the standardization part. So it's really a big issue because the critical point about standardization is the possibility to navigate from one format of data to another, because everybody is kind of working on their own. We just have to take the language as example. Like, I'm French, I'm trying to have a language standards where I can navigate from French to English. So we need to do the same with our data. And for example, there are for the bibliographic data, there are so many standards like Dublin Core, MARC, RDF, XML, and so on. So the issue is real, and it's really hard to go from one format to another. However, everybody wants to extract intelligence from data. The interoperability is necessary to have a good result again, and interoperable systems as well are really needed to work in your own if you want, but you can be able to work with someone else without difficulties. I'm gonna go to the next slide, please. So here, I want to talk to you about the relevant peer review methods, because nowadays peer review is a really hot topic. It's really creative. It's appears sometimes to fail to keeping scientific publication rigorous and honest. And I think, and I'm not speaking in my name only, I think it's because of the black box who surround the peer review method. So as the research volume increase, we felt a real need for a more transparent ecosystem for peer review. So within the last few years, we saw a lot of initiatives, a lot of projects were launched in order to change the way of thinking for more relevant data and science. We can mention Crossref initiative or peer review transparency workshop. But here I want to put on the table two touchy points. The first one is, how can we find competent people to do the review? Recently, I read an article entitled "How Elsevier Find Its Peer Reviewer" about a particle physicist specialist who've been asking to do a review on a paper dealing with diabetes, which is quite lame, sorry for the word. But here, like really, artificial intelligence can play a big role by analyzing publication already like available, target the good profile and make suggestions to say like, hey, look, the scientific one can definitely help you to review this publication because it's his field of expertise. The touchy points I want to point as well is, how can we guarantee the author to stay anonymous, and for having a double-blind review, and how to avoid conflict of interest. So in March this year, Digital Science posted a press release about their collaboration with Catalysis and Springer Nature about exploring the blockchain technology for peer review. So if you can go to the next slide, I can explain a little bit more what is blockchain technology. I'm pretty sure everybody's kind of know blockchain because of the Bitcoins, which is make you a billionaire right now. So I think pretty much everybody knows it. But we have to know that blockchain is actually a technology for sure to make a safe way to transfer money and to make money, but is also a safe way to transfer information, or for here to review, peer review publications. So I'm going to try to explain the schema you have on the screen. So let's say the computer A wants to send, or the user A wants to send a message or a publication to the computer B, the user B. So the message it will send will be transformed as a block on the chain, and then it's gonna be sent to a network of user. This network of user are gonna send back their approval to the block. And here is the really important point. If one of the users are not able to send the review, all the process will be shut down, because that means maybe he have trouble with his computer or phone or tablet or whatever. Maybe someone tried to sneak into the process or something. And so it makes the process really sure and clear. So if the process is still going on and all the network are okay with the message or with the transfer, money transfer, whatever, the block will go back in the blockchain, and then the user B will have this message. So it's a really, I think, easy on the paper process, but it shows you that technology can really help us to have really transparency on any process here on peer reviewing. And for example, I was talking about the conflict of interest will be shut down. Network, when people are reviewing the publication, for example, if we identify that one of the reviewer have a conflict of interest, the process will be shut down, and then at the end, the peer review will be as transparent and as honest and as safe as possible. Also, a really fun fact, that is the blockchain actually at the most artificial intelligence, and numeric science are not really following the usual path of peer review and publication. It's usually on the dark web or on the pirate peer reviewing website. So it's kind of weird, but also funny to think about it. But anyway, I'm gonna go through the next slide, please. And I'm gonna talk to you about the visibility and the discoverability of your data. Okay, now you have clean data with good standard that you can exchange with people. So we've been through a lot of work already, but what's next? So you want to spread your knowledge and meanwhile learn from other research institute or university, or like you just want to discover. So I think having more and more open data and open repository is the key. That's the point that for sure, if you want to discover more, you need to have access to the info and to the data. In France, for example, since 2016, there are a new law called République numérique, which means numeric republic. And so it says that one author of a scientific writing, even if he gives the exclusive right to a publisher, has also the right to make available in an open format and for free the final version of the manuscript on open repository. And especially if the science was financed by the state or some Europe funds, or public money, kind of as we say in France. So this kind of incentive promoting the open science and make the data more visible and discoverable, which is a good point. When you spend so much time working on your data, you just want to put it through the world, everywhere. So I think government should be more aware of that, and innovation will be probably faster if everybody have the access to the same good, clear information. But yeah, okay. So open data, clean, standardized, and then to go through all of this, you need a powerful semantic research tool. So can you imagine the web without searching engines? It would be so weird. We would be ending up jumping from web pages to web pages randomly without really knowing what are you looking for, what I'm going here. So if you use actually a semantic research tool as Elasticsearch, for example, which is an open source program, it sounds simple like this to see oh yeah, of course we need a tool for semantic research, but it's not that obvious. And database search functionality are not enough to be able to retrieve relevant data quickly. So I was talking about Elasticsearch, and it's a software who can de facto standard the searching through data and aggregating it in a smart ways. Plus, since you have a good research tools, you can apply, for example, artificial intelligence to make suggestion. So imagine a solution capable of doing research on different kind of metadata, like keywords, contributors, DOI, for example, and then fetching you the most relevant items. And cherry on the top, being able to suggest you new items that may interest you in some ways. that is the real point of like working together like tools, robots with artificial intelligence, and then you can have all you need to make your decision actually. Also, this is not those technologies are not so far. The European Fund Edge 2020 recently launched a tender regarding the use of the machine learning to suggest scientific collaboration based on database content. So tomorrow, almost everybody can have access to this kind of tools for their, I don't know, university, research institute, or whatever. It's like, Amazon who recommends product on their website based on the past research, but a little bit more challenging. And now you have kind of everything: good data, good standards, open science and open data, a good research tool. You need to put it all together. And if you can go to the next slide, I'll show you that some interactive platforms are actually already existing. So basically, this schema is kind of a sum up of everything what I say. Imagine you can put all the content you want, from digital content, bibliometric database, whatever, publication, books, video, whatever. Put it in a system with a really strong API to retrieve all the metadata. The system can structure them and then give you analytics. And on the top, you can have an configurable workflow. I don't know, like you kind of web page with a home page with your preferred past research, for example. So this kind of interactive platform is, in my view, the future, and every university or research center need to have enough tool and enough possibilities to, from scratch, from big data, to have actionable data and then analytics. And then from there, you can, of course, use artificial intelligence, and it will help you to make good decision making. That's the way it is. It seems very simple like this. You have to think about all the work it needed to. So if you can go to the next slide, and it could be my last and my conclusion. That was I was saying, like, do not neglect the amount of work the data requires. So yeah, to retrieve all the metadata and then clean them, standardize them, it can take you weeks, months, maybe more. But it's really important to have this at the beginning and from the start. Why choose open source? Well, it seems pretty obvious to me, but for sure, more the data will be open and accessible, more you have choice, and more your decision will be taking with all the information you can have. So open source for me, and open access and open science are the future of innovation and decision making. Well, at the end, I'm going to be kind of Westworld input, but at the end, can any AI take the place of the human being? At the end, we're still making the decision, and it's important to, I think, have like this power, kind of. So yeah, this is my last point. Let's stay human. I'm a real person again. I'm not an artificial intelligence. And I thank you very much for listening to me.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Pauline. So we now have about 15 minutes before the end of our allotted time for our seminar. So we do have some time for one or two questions. So do we have any thoughts in the audience? Any hands in the air? We do at the back there. I'll make my way over with the microphone. You have to talk into the microphone because we are recording the session.
Just a quick question about the French initiative and whether that includes embargo periods for making that final article available as the version of record. To Pauline.
Pauline, did you hear that?
No, I'm so sorry. I hear absolutely nothing.
So the question was about the program that you talked about, whether there were embargo periods for the content. So that's when a piece of content is published, then there is a length of time before it can be made open and used.
Yeah, well, the embargo is something we can easily deal with. I think when you have embargoes on publication, you still have access to the title, sometimes the abstract and the author. So it's, of course, not the best and the optimal amount of data you want to make a decision, of course, but it's still something you can work with. And it's still something you can clean and standardize and put into a system to element a system to give you analytics, for example.
Excellent. So I have a question. So Pauline talked a lot about open repositories, and of course not only the content repository, document repositories, but also data repositories. And you, John, talked a lot about the different types of artificial intelligence techniques and programs and so forth. But one of the things that we haven't touched on, particularly in the first half, is the use of AI techniques on experimental data sets. We talked a lot about content and text mining, but we haven't talked about processing experimental research data. So what do you think, and this is for all of the panel, is there a role for publishers or librarians in that space facilitating it or providing the technology? What does the future look like for us and for that area of what AI can do?
Who wants to go first? I've got things to say for sure. Okay. In fact, one of the things I really wanted to cover in my talk, but with my 25 minutes that I pushed up from 20 anyway, I wasn't able to, is that my talk was really about why scholarly communication needs AI, but I really wanted to also think about why AI needs us in scholarly communication, and I think this ties in quite nicely because artificial intelligence has very different requirements to it has specific requirements for data, and in order to make good models, you normally need the negative results as well as the positive results, and so this means that traditional publishing, which already is deeply flawed by publishing just positive results and the sort of the snazzy new topic and relates to impact factor and everything. This is not going to be good enough for all of the endless companies in the world that want to be using these types of data sets. So sorry, what I'm trying to say is that we're going to need to think about how we curate data and the service that we provide for the sort of artificial intelligence explosion, because I've been reading, and some companies are already starting to partner directly with research institutions in order to get direct access to the data with the negative results, so that they can perform, so they get the entire spectrum of results and not just the ones that people are willing to share. So I think this is incredibly interesting, and it basically applies to this question on data, which actually I've vaguely forgotten what it was. But to be honest, yes,
what
I think
can publishers do or librarians do to
Yeah,
create
okay,
value?
yeah.
What's our role here?
our role is services and thinking about what people actually want to do and what people actually want to need, and then facilitating that. And data is going to be increasingly important and more important even than the published articles. And there's also going to be loads and loads of new business models there, like it's text and data mining and analysis of data repositories are just going to ought to explode if we can be smart enough to do something about it, because that's where the value is going to lie. And this is my private thought as well on not for long on the Chinese Academy of Sciences move, saying that they've recently said that all Chinese research data is going to have to be on a central government repository. And a lot of people have been talking about how this is really about censorship, but I don't think it's about censorship at all. It's about AI, because the reason Chinese AI is so far ahead in terms of things like facial recognition and stuff is because they have the Chinese government uses all the CCTV, and they have a much bigger image database than most other countries, and this means they're absolutely flying ahead. And I think it's going to be exactly the same with research data. So the fact that we all work in research data and we don't do enough with research data is a massive flaw, and come on, guys. That's my thought.
I think the point about the fact that most of our databases do not contain negative results is really important. For training data sets, I think negative results are every bit as important as positive ones. One of the things I remember reading last week is that AI has now been trained to recognize dog breeds very, very well. So it can recognize a Chihuahua, but it occasionally makes a mistake on a blueberry muffin. And I looked at my Chihuahua sitting next to me and thought, no way would I make that mistake. She certainly wouldn't make that mistake of thinking a blueberry muffin was another Chihuahua. So I think these things are going to need to be trained on negative results. And that may be a reason we're going to have to start at least incorporating negative results into databases. I don't know that they'll ever go through publication systems the way we now organize them, but it may be that negative results really can be handled through mega journals of particular sorts. I think it could be important.
Thanks, and I mean, just remember when you're trying to look at your Chihuahua, just to put your glasses on, because that will help. But in terms of kind of experimental data sets and the need to kind of have and acquire data, I think it's it just helps to have them. I guess that's the point there that we're making here is that the more data you have, the better it is to help train the algorithm in order to find patterns in this data. There may be one sense in looking at if we're only looking at kind of data which has impact through what has been cited. What about data which hasn't been cited? Because an awful lot of literature kind of doesn't get cited, and there's a sense there that may give an interesting insight as well. But kind of any tools to help surface and link kind of data to explore, I think will just only help us.
Yeah, so a big part of that, I suppose, is curation services. Is that when I've been involved in things like the AGU's Fair Data research group, and the Belmont did something similar as well, the Belmont Forum. One of the things that came up time and time again is that nobody is curating the data sets that researchers are producing, just massive data sets, when you aggregate across the whole thing. And nobody has the resources to do it. The funding doesn't exist. I think there is positive moves from the European Commission to set aside, percentages of research grants to enable that kind of data management to happen. But I think that perhaps publishers and librarians
Web of Science
have a role in normalizing data sets, creating structured repositories, creating unstructured repositories, or at least participating in partnership with them.
Yeah, and I mean, just referring our own platform, Web of Science, I think you can search related data sets now through the data citation index. So we are trying to surface these. I think that's been that was a net new enhancement. So that's another way of trying to just expose data to that point of use, which is about using references, I guess, more cleverly in a way.
Yeah. Pauline, any thoughts before we see if there's another question?
No, well, I think everything was just said, so go on for the next question.
Somebody have a question. There we go.
Okay.
Wait for the microphone, otherwise the people at home won't be able to hear you.
Thank you. Okay, John, you were talking about how AI can detect sort of this John. Hi, Wire John. how AI can potentially detect emerging trends, emerging concepts, new authors. One of the challenges for publishers actually is in conferences. And a conference for a publisher is scheduled 6 to 9 months ahead of time. And you want to make sure that conference you're talking about emerging concepts, right? You don't want to be, if you're planning the conference now, what's relevant in 9 months is way different. So my question around all of that is, for AI to be able to make important decisions about what's emerging, where do you get that content from? Because it seems to me you can't analyze existing research papers, because then you'll be figuring out what was talked about then and not in the future. So how do you get access to content so that the AI can make intelligent decisions about that?
That's a really good question. It's the $1 million question. The interest among the editors we were working with in Emergence, it was clear that the data sets to use for this are not solely publication data sets. In working with one editor in particular, I was surprised to learn that the funding data sets are not good for this purpose in his particular field, which was cardiovascular research. He said, nope, conferences are better than the funding data sets, which just totally surprised me. It made us rethink where we were going for our information. And the challenge with mining conferences is, of course, there's no cross-ref for conferences. There's no central database. There aren't 4 or 5 major platforms that do conferences. The data's not public. It's not necessarily even accessible under subscriptions. So it's really hard to mine conference data. The tool called Horizon Scanning that Meta has uses 200 different data sources. If you send me an email, sac@highwire.org, I'll send you the white paper they have on that, which lists a couple dozen of them. I don't think it lists 200 of them. It's a pretty sophisticated white paper. It has math in it that I had to stare at and say, what was this again? But it suggests that you have to look in a lot of different places, not just conference proceedings. So you'd look in GenBank, for example, and start to see what is starting to be populated rapidly in terms of data being reported. I can't remember too many of the other data sets, but there are quite a few of them. Emergence is a hard thing because all of our databases are lagging the origin of the concept, especially publication databases.
Yeah, just one observation. So I attended a search and retrieval conference last year, and one of the vendors who was speaking was, using Twitter feeds, for example. And their, kind of existing business model at the time was to, can we sell our service to journalists? Because they obviously know journalists want to write about groundbreaking stories, kind of hot off the press. But they realized that journalists didn't actually have any money to subscribe to the service. So a little bit more thought went into the business model, and they realized actually the people who have money and want to know groundbreaking news are traders, kind of on the stock market. So they kind of repositioned. The kind of the common here is that, they're using Twitter feeds to monitor, kind of topics, hot topics, emerging topics, and that's kind of almost kind of now content, which hasn't even yet been classified. It's just kind of almost kind of verbal well, you can describe Twitter as what you want, but it's, it's people's almost thoughts as to what's going on right now. So arguably, kind of there could be a business model on, kind of a Twitter feed from your conference to then mine it and then, kind of use that to help predict what it is that people may be talking about. But, kind of the point there is that, we're now moving kind of, I think, Phil mentioned it earlier, kind of the alt metrics where you have kind of these social indicators where they're different data sources. They're not necessarily curated data sources, but it's still an interesting data source to look at. And it can tell you something interesting, but you do need to be able to mine it. You can contact Twitter, for example, and get access to their Twitter feed, and you can do some research projects on that if that's an interest to extend into. But yeah, there are different ways of accessing this information. I think it's just trying to apply it to your kind of particular use case. And sometimes that's what we haven't necessarily answered, is my sense from here, is that there's an emergent question, but you don't necessarily see a solution in front of you. But you can sense that, well, I know AI can do this, and I know Twitter has that. Can't we just get the two together and then help me make a better decision? And hopefully, the vendors or companies will start thinking it through. And that's kind of the innovator game, where we're getting these new ideas, which will then suddenly shift the business model, and people are then starting thinking about data and practicing it in very different manners. And I think that's this AI transformation that we're just looking at now.
So maybe what you'd mine for emergent stuff for conferences would be the questions that are posed at the ends of the articles in the discussion section, because that's where people are pointing to what they next want to get funding for. That's interesting. It's the questions that are interesting, not the answers.
Anthony Watkinson, Cyber Research. Just a very quick point. I've been doing quite a lot of work looking at people's use of data sets. The trouble is, and bringing conferences too, there's so much variation in the reliability of the data that gets deposited. Now, publishers are doing something. For example, there's Dryad, there's Pangea, where publishers are working together with a repository to save things. There, we know what we're doing. They know what they're doing. But in conferences, they're ranked within, say, the engineering community very severely. They know what is good and worth going for. But in other areas, that's not quite clear. An outsider doesn't know. For example, the Joint Genome Institute, anybody in the field knows that people put in a lot of crap because there's no monitoring. Anybody could put in what they like. At least they did a year ago. I'm sorry, I may be out of date. This is true of quite a lot of well-known data banks. The people in the immediate field know, but we don't know, and there's no way of outsiders knowing at the moment the way things are structured.
I think that goes partly to our role, doesn't it, as curators? But go on.
Yeah, I agree. And it's about how people say, oh, will AI get rid of jobs? And no, likely to create them because whole new things will be necessary. And again, I think all of this ties together into the idea of creating value and value pools and how these will shift over time. And in some ways, AI is just a useful one example, one lens that we can use to suddenly put into the spotlight and the sunlight the fact that a lot of the time we are supporting research, but actually when you talk to scientists, we're not actually doing a very good job of it a huge amount of the time. So I think it's a useful lens to think about what is doing science, what do people want to know, where is the value going to be in the future, and what can we do to facilitate that. And I think, like you said, talking about emerging topics, we're going to go increasingly further back in the, we can always see all the focus on articles, or now everyone's excited about preprints, now everyone's excited about grants, and like people are waking up to the fact that what people do in research on a daily basis maybe is not being reflected by any of the services that we offer.
Yeah, I think Pauline might have some thoughts on this. Did you hear the question, Pauline?
Actually, I have some trouble with my connection, so I cannot hear half of the purpose. I'm really sorry. I wish I could answer, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer that question.
Well, so the question was, about the quality of data sets that are available. Very often practitioners within a field know that a particular data set is of poor or excellent quality, but it's not necessarily immediately apparent to people outside of that field, particularly from the point of view of information professionals, publishers, perhaps even librarians. So what can we... often researchers too, other researchers in adjacent fields. So what can we do to address that quality issue? And just very quickly, because we're just running over time now.
Well, the quality issue is actually needs more than 2 minutes to be addressed. But I think the peer review method when it's like going to be more transparent and more clear, that what I'd say in my presentation, definitely will be allow us to have access to more. The quality of the publication will be raised because of the peer review method, I think.
Excellent. So, last thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, just a quick one. You're talking about a veracity indicator, and that's something which the Reuters team released last year, which News Tracer, which was kind of as these emerging news articles are being written, kind of can you actually trust them? So they're using an algorithm to actually classify and kind of almost rate or rank, kind of a trustfulness of a news source. So again, kind of in scientific publishing, a lot of materials going outside of peer-reviewed journals, can you trust and rely upon it? So I think there's just an opportunity to help discover and call that out.
John, you get the last word. All right. So I think that kind of wraps it up for us. I'll just come back to this mic here. So, what have we learned? We've learned that we should stop talking about AI and we should start talking about strategy. We have learned that there is certainly a lot of potential value in detecting emergence, although it's a very, very hard problem. We have learned that AI can assist us in helping us make better decisions. So it can help us move past anecdotal evidence and move towards a data-driven decision-making framework. And we have learned that in the future, as there is more and more data made openly available, some of these tools may be very powerful to help researchers answer questions, perhaps, and we have a role to play potentially in making sure that happens by supporting curation and working with data repositories and open data. So I think those are our kind of 4 take-homes from this seminar. So thank you very much. If you could thank all the speakers again, please, and thanks very much for coming.